The Legend of Zelda is one of the most iconic series in all of gaming, and also happens to be my personal favorite. I've set out to rank every main series game and compile the ultimate Zelda series ranking. In this video, we are looking at the best-selling Zelda game ever, The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. We will be scoring the game across these 10 categories. Each category will be scored from 1 to 5, with 5 being the best. Each category score is being chosen in relation to other games in the series. At the end, everything will be averaged out to get our final result. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video where I will reveal the next Zelda review, and spoilers ahead. In ancient times, the Sheikah race had developed Hyrule into an advanced civilization, protected by 4 enormous animalistic machines called the Divine Beasts, and an army of autonomous weapons called Guardians. When an ancient evil known as
Calamity Ganon
appeared and threatened Hyrule, 4 great warriors were given the title Champion, and each piloted one of the Divine Beasts to weaken Ganon when the princess with the blood of the goddess and her appointed knight fought and defeated him by sealing him away. 10 millennia later, the Kingdom of Hyrule has since regressed to a medieval state. Reading their ancestors' prophecies, the Hylians recognized the sign of Ganon's return and excavated surrounding areas to uncover the Divine Beasts and Guardians. During this time, Princess Zelda trained vigorously to awaken the sealing magic needed to defeat Ganon while trying to maintain her personal research. In the meantime, a knight was appointed to protect her, Link, who was chosen due to his ability to wield the Master Sword, also known as the Sword that Seals the Darkness. After being sought out by Zelda, the champions Mipha, Princess of the Aquatic Zora, Revali, Archer of the Bird-like Rito, Daruk, Warrior of the Mountainous Gorons, and Urbosa, Chief of the Desert-dwelling Gerudo, assembled to pilot the Divine Beasts, while Zelda and Link would face Ganon directly. However, on Zelda's 17th birthday, Ganon possessed the Guardians and Divine Beasts, turning them against Hyrule. King Rhoam and the champions were killed, the castle town was destroyed, and Link was gravely wounded protecting Hyrule while on their way to Fort Hateno. Zelda had Link taken to safety for him to heal, hid the Master Sword in Korok Forest under the protection of the Great Deku Tree, and used her light magic to seal herself and Ganon in Hyrule Castle. This cataclysmic tragedy became known over time as the Great Calamity. A century after being placed in a healing chamber in the Shrine of Resurrection, Link awakens in a now ravaged Hyrule. He meets an old man who eventually reveals himself as the lingering spirit of King Rhoam. Rhoam explains that Ganon, sealed in Hyrule Castle, has grown stronger. He pleads for Link to defeat Ganon before he regains his full strength, breaks free, and destroys the world. Link travels across Hyrule, returning to locations from his past and regaining his memories. With the help of Hyrule's people, he boards the 4 Divine Beasts and purges them of the Ganon Blights, releasing the spirits of Hyrule's former champions and allowing them to pilot the Divine Beast once again. After obtaining the Master Sword from Korok Forest, Link enters Hyrule Castle and confronts Ganon. The Divine Beasts weaken him, and after Link defeats him, he transforms into Dark Beast Ganon in an attempt to destroy the world. Zelda gives Link the Bow of Light, which allows him to weaken Ganon enough for Zelda to seal him away, restoring peace and allowing the spirits of King Rhoam and the champions to depart to the afterlife. Sensing their presence, Link and Zelda smile fondly. Zelda declares that Hyrule must be rebuilt and that she and Link must begin the process by themselves. As Link and Zelda survey Hyrule and embark to restore its former glory, the princess confides in him that she may no longer possess any supernatural power, yet has to come to terms with it. I'm scoring the story a 3 out of 5. Breath of the Wild's open nature, with having the ability to do events in any order, does mean that sacrifices had to be made when it comes to telling a cohesive story. One aspect that makes the story less interesting is that basically all the most interesting story developments all happened in the past and very little changes in the present until the end of the game. When it comes to the characters, I do think Breath of the Wild manages to create one of the best Princess Zeldas in the series, with her journey of unlocking her powers that we experience through Link's memories. While voice acting in the game is not exactly top-notch, it's still nice to actually hear spoken dialogue from Zelda, which I think does more good than bad at making her a more fully realized character.
Yes, I don't believe it, but I actually caught one. This delicacy is known to have very, very potent effects under the proper circumstances. Ta-da!
I do enjoy the champions as well, each with their own distinct personality, but I was a little bit put off that the present-day character equivalents didn't really get their due. It seems to me they were setting up a passing of the torch situation where the characters we meet in the present time would take over as the new champions to help us defeat Ganon, but the old champions who already died just continued to be the main driving force behind each divine beast, which felt a little odd. The world of Breath of the Wild is the game. Once the tutorial section, the Great Plateau, is complete, you will have all your main abilities and the world is yours to explore. I can't even begin to justify the importance of Breath of the Wild's Hyrule. It literally changed video games forever. Any mountain you want to climb, you can. Any island you see on the map, there's a way to get there. It's an amazing experience the first time you get to explore. The world is really the driving force behind the game. Sure, if you want to, you can go right to Ganon and beat the game, but you'd be missing out to not at least explore it on your first playthrough. There's many open world and sandbox games where it's easy to get lost or go in a direction that the game doesn't want you to, but Breath of the Wild never tells you the word no. The first objective is whatever you want it to be, and getting lost or distracted by something else is not a negative, but a positive. The world is densely packed with shrines, enemy camps, and other points of interest, meaning you'll never go too far without seeing something you'll want to investigate. There's no hearts to heal you, so wildlife is now an important resource to keep you alive, making what's in the world itself ever more important. Hyrule has a nice diversity of biomes, and each one has its own weather conditions. You'll have to adjust Link's gear to accommodate any harsh weather conditions, or else you're gonna take continual damage. The world gets a 5 out of 5. Breath of the Wild's Hyrule is a masterclass in open world design. The meat of the game centers around players just exploring at their own will, and it's a magnificent experience. Breath of the Wild is a beautiful looking game. I can't tell you how many times while playing, I would just randomly stop at the top of a mountain and just take in the incredible view. The game uses a cel-shaded art style that is very anime-like, reminding me a lot of Studio Ghibli films. This more cartoony style has helped it age pretty gracefully. Given that it was originally developed for the Wii U, it still holds up well 5+ years later. On top of the incredible landscapes, I'm also a big fan of the character designs. Link and Zelda's Breath of the Wild versions already feel pretty iconic at this point. Art style gets a 5 out of 5. While it may not be my personal favorite Zelda art style, Breath of the Wild is one of the most beautiful looking games out there still to this day. Every landscape, town, and landmark makes for a breathtaking experience. The gameplay and combat for Breath of the Wild was a welcome change. After Twilight Princess basically took the traditional 3D Zelda combat as far as it could go, and Skyward Sword did some experimenting, Breath of the Wild made the necessary true next step. While it may be overly cliche at this point to say the game decided to take a more Souls-like approach to its combat, with dodging and blocking being much more necessary parts of the combat experience, unlike previous games, you can't just spam your way through any enemy, at least for the tougher ones. Properly dodging attacks will activate a flurry rush, where you can mash attacks to get in a lot of extra damage. You can also use your shield to reflect attacks, such as beams from guardians, sending it right back at the enemy, doing substantial damage. The most contentious part of Breath of the Wild's combat is the breakable weapons. Each weapon has a set durability and will eventually break and disappear after a certain number of hits. The design has its pros and cons. The pros for this design is that it forces creativity and improvisation. You can never comfortably sit with a set number of powerful weapons. They will eventually break on you, and you will find yourself in scenarios where you have to scour for a weapon nearby or use one you weren't intending to in that situation. You may also have to use the environment or other abilities instead if you find yourself completely weaponless. Some might not like this kind of discomfort created in combat scenarios, but the design ensures that each encounter feels at least a little bit unique. Now for the cons, the durability for nearly all of the items save for bows and shields are simply overtuned to break too easily. If they had them last a little bit longer, I think it would have improved many players' experiences significantly. This basically makes a lot of items not very special or memorable because it's gone before you even begin to want to miss it. While not necessarily a con, I also think that there was a huge missed opportunity when it comes to the different types of weapons. Many people forget the fact that it was very uncommon for Link and other games to wield different weapon types, such as spears, clubs, and axes. If weapons stuck around a little bit longer, it would have been nice to see more scenarios where certain weapons were more advantageous. We do actually see some of this, like for example, a weapon like the Boulder Breaker will decimate a stone talus, guardian weapons will be good against guardians, fire weapons against ice enemies, etc. I just would have liked to see weapon types be more important in certain fights, for example using a spear instead of an axe based on the movesets of the particular enemies. While many complain that flurry rushes are too OP and trivialize combat, and there is a fair criticism there, the biggest problem with combat is food. At any moment during an encounter, you're free to pause the game and heal up as much as you want. So as long as you are well stocked in food, there is nearly no challenge you can't take on. Removing this one feature would be an absolute game changer, and I hope that happens in future games. The environment and physics engine also play a major role in the gameplay. Fires will spread in the grass and also create updrafts so you can use your paraglider to take advantage of that. Dropping metal crates on enemies will damage them. I can't even begin to do justice to the amount of crazy things you can do due to the physics in this game. If you don't believe me, just watch any speedrun. Another central part of the gameplay is climbing. Breath of the Wild took the stamina meter from Skyward Sword and improved upon it in every single way. No longer is there these awkward green light balls laying around, but now we have a stamina meter that we can upgrade the same way as our health, through collecting spirit orbs as shrines are completed. Climbing is such a central aspect of navigating Hyrule that you are highly motivated to upgrade stamina. You can also craft certain meals and potions to temporarily boost your stamina as well. As you play through your adventure, you really get a sense of how much stamina you have and thus appropriately gauge which areas are climbable and what areas you can rest at on the cliff sides while making your journey upward. It's a very rewarding feeling to make your way up one of the many massive mountains and appreciate the view at the top. The one problem while climbing is rain. Link cannot make any progress climbing when it's raining, which means you're forced to either wait it out or do something else. It's been discussed to death by many already, but the game should have included some gear or a potion to make climbing in the rain possible at least some of the time. I'm genuinely surprised that this was never addressed. Gameplay gets a 4 out of 5. Breath of the Wild evolved the combat and gameplay in a way that the series sorely needed. It's very close to being the most top-notch gameplay in the series, but weapons that break just a bit too easily and a healing system that straight up feels like cheating hold it back from perfection. Hopefully these will be addressed in the upcoming sequel Tears of the Kingdom. Breath of the Wild offers more items for Link to use than any other Zelda game. I talked about how weapons do break easily, but I appreciate the sheer variety of weapons available. Boomerangs, spiked clubs, thunder blades, frost blades, flame blades, two-handed swords, it goes on and on. Cooking opens up an entire world of temporary powers you can give Link to increase his attack, speed, durability, and more. It's there if you need it, but usually not necessary to get through most of the game. Due to weather conditions in certain parts of Hyrule, what you choose to equip for gear is now more important than ever. You can choose to temporarily remedy the situation with a potion to say endure volcanic levels of heat, or fork over the rupees to have a more long-term solution. Needing the proper gear for the appropriate weather adds a nice extra level of immersion. There's additional gear available, including ones that boost your stealth or attack. The majority of gear is also available to be improved via upgrades. The true stars of the game for items are the paraglider and the runes of the Sheikah Slate. First, the paraglider was a brilliant item to accompany the huge focus on traversing Hyrule. Climbing being such a very crucial part of exploration means you need an interesting way to get back down from those high areas. The paraglider perfectly fits that need and feels incredibly satisfying. The runes consist of 4 main abilities: Magnesis, which allows you to grab and move metal objects, Cryonis, which allows you to create ice blocks anywhere there is water, Stasis, which lets you freeze an object in time and build its momentum before it's released from its frozen state, and Remote Bombs, which are basically exactly what you would expect from a Zelda game, but you also get cube-shaped bombs too, which is nice when you don't want the bomb to roll away. While these 4 abilities bombs aside may seem kind of random for a Zelda game, they create some incredible puzzles. They manage to make these abilities feel relatively fresh throughout the many hours of gameplay due to the nearly infinite amount of puzzle combinations. Though not exactly items, I feel the champion abilities fit best here. You acquire each one by defeating the Divine Beast for that respective champion. Rivali's Gale will create an updraft so Link can soar high into the air anywhere you choose. Mipha's Grace gives you an extra life plus additional hearts. Urbosa's Fury is just straight up broken and does insane AoE damage, and Daruk's Protection will block attacks automatically if you don't block them correctly for a set number of times. Items get a 5 out of 5. Breath of the Wild hosts an insanely large number of weapons, shields, food, and potions for Link to use in his journey. There's more options to take on encounters than ever before. The runes given at the start, however, are what really carries the experience. You're given the abilities once the tutorial is complete, and that's pretty much all you need to solve any puzzle in the game, which is truly mind-blowing. Easily the most controversial category when it comes to this game is the dungeons. Traditional Zelda dungeons from Ocarina of Time forward, for the most part, had some type of theming, a key item, a host of enemies, puzzles, and a big boss that yielded a heart container. Breath of the Wild did away with a number of those traditions. Instead of having 8 to 12 big dungeons, Breath of the Wild's base game has 120 shrines which act as miniature dungeons, and then 4 divine beasts in a final dungeon of Hyrule Castle. While in concept it may have seemed like a great idea to have many bite-sized dungeons to fit this new hybrid console when the Switch released, allowing players to commit to less time for each play session, the shrine concept starts to wear thin about 3/4 of the way through the game, when you start to see a lot of very similar shrine types come up, such as Tests of Strength, or ones that just straight up give you a reward. They all start to feel less and less unique as you progress. The fact that each shrine has the exact same aesthetic and music only adds to the player getting more and more tired of them. I think many of us are praying we don't see any type of Sheikah theming in Tears of the Kingdom. I think the shrines prove that a puzzle in a vacuum just doesn't stay interesting for very long. In the past, Zelda did a great job of obscuring relatively simple and even mundane puzzles and making them feel more exciting. Defeating enemies to complete a challenge on its face isn't very exciting, but when you're entering an abandoned prison and destroying 4 lost post souls to light the 4 flames to progress further into the Arbiter's grounds, all of a sudden things start to get a lot more interesting, immersive, and exciting. When every shrine is just a test for the chosen hero, it starts to lose any kind of meaning. The importance of lore and theming can't be understated. It's why many love dungeons such as the Forest Temple or Snow Peak Ruins, and why nobody ever says, dude, you aren't a Zelda fan if you haven't experienced the Keh Namut Shrine. The Divine Beasts act as the proper dungeon replacement, and there are 4 of them to take on, which you can do in any order. I'll go over them in the order I chose to play them. Va Meadow is the bird-like Divine Beast and my favorite of the bunch. Each Divine Beast has you turn on the main terminal, which gives you the ability to manipulate the Divine Beast itself to solve puzzles. You're tasked with activating additional terminals before facing a final boss. Again, like the shrines, the aesthetic between all the beasts is basically the same. Many new players will likely be wowed by the first Divine Beast they take on, only to realize halfway through the second one, they're all gonna be like this, aren't they? Va Meadow is the wind-themed dungeon, and tilting the beast to lean to the left or right will help you complete the terminal activations. I like Va Meadow the most for 2 reasons. 1, it's very easy to cheese the puzzles, and 2, Revali's Gale. Revali's Gale is pretty much the solution to all your problems. Want to climb a Sheikah Tower and there's bad stuff in the way? Revali's Gale. Want to skip a trial in Korok Forest? Revali's Gale. Want to trivialize puzzles in other Divine Beasts? Revali's Gale. Va Ruta is the water-themed Divine Beast and is considered to be the easiest one. The game very much leads you in the direction of challenging this one first. The gimmick of this one is controlling the elephant trunk to have water fall in specific places to then activate the appropriate terminals. Va Naboris is the electric-themed and most difficult and complicated Divine Beasts. You have 3 cylinders that you can spin 360 degrees inside the Camel Beast's body. While still pretty fast to complete compared to traditional Zelda dungeons, the extra bit of complexity in this one is a welcome sight. Lastly, there is Va Radunia, which is the fire-themed dungeon. It's at least a little interesting that you start this beast completely in the dark until you activate the main terminal. Once you are able to control it, you're able to tilt Va Radunia on its side and then back. As you would expect, you use these controls and your wits to activate the terminals. There is additional shrines and an additional Divine Beast that is not in the base game, and I will discuss those shortly in the side content category. Hyrule Castle is the final dungeon of Breath of the Wild, and for the base game, it's the best dungeon. I mean, the bar is pretty low, to be honest. Hyrule Castle feels the most like a traditional Zelda dungeon, but it's more of just a place that you can explore and loot. You'll find some of the hardest enemies in the game here, but also some of the best weapons and items. You also have the option to skip pretty much all of it and go right to Ganon if you choose to do so. I like that it's extremely flexible, and it's fun to explore such a vast indoor area, and even though it feels most like a traditional Zelda dungeon out of the other ones in the game, it still does lack that true Zelda dungeon feel. Dungeons get a 1 out of 5. Breath of the Wild does many things right, but it's no surprise that the biggest complaint of the game is no traditional dungeons. As much as I appreciate Nintendo trying something new with shrines in the Divine Beasts, it just never really comes close to scratching that traditional Zelda dungeon itch. Breath of the Wild has about 15 or so different standard enemies, however each enemy has many different variations. For instance, the Choo-Choo has a standard, fire, ice, and electric variation. While standard enemies can start to feel a little too repetitive by the end of the game, the enemies do continue to get stronger as you progress. You will start to encounter more difficult variations of enemies like Bokoblins and Moblins. The enemies were tuned very well and can hit pretty dang hard. The best among the standard enemies is the Lynel. There's several different versions of Lynels, but they feel more like bosses than some of the bosses in this game. They are far and away the most challenging thing to fight, and the most fun too. Guardians, especially the Guardian Stalkers, are pretty intimidating to fight. Once you hear that music, you know you're in trouble. Without them, Hyrule Field would not feel nearly as hostile and treacherous as it is. The amount of resources available to take on Guardians makes them all the more satisfying to defeat. The mini-bosses in Breath of the Wild consist mainly of Stone Talus, Hinox, Stalnox, and Molduga. You fight all of these pretty much in the same way every time, but they are fun and feel more like traditional Zelda bosses than some of the main bosses. The Divine Beasts each end with a boss, and that's where the Blight Ganons come in. Thunder Blight, Fire Blight, Water Blight, and Wind Blight. I could go into each one of these, but they really just aren't that interesting. I'm bored just thinking about these bosses. Thunder Blight is the only one that feels a little bit different and is by far the hardest of the four. The other three, you can usually just shoot them in the eye with arrows until it's stunned and then spam attacks at them. Thunder Blight at least encourages flurry rushes more and has a second phase where magnetism is needed to have Thunder Blight shock itself. Master Koga is a boss at the end of the Yiga clan hideout. This boss gets clowned on a lot for being too easy, but I enjoy it for the fact that it feels more like an old school Zelda boss. I also appreciate it being a comic relief boss, which brought some much needed levity to the main story.
Calamity Ganon
Is the final boss and has varying degrees of difficulty depending on how you play the game. If you don't complete any of the Divine Beasts, then you must defeat all the Blight Ganons and then fight
Calamity Ganon
at full health. So any Blight Ganon you do not beat in the story will be waiting for you at Hyrule Castle. I think most people completed all the Divine Beasts before fighting Ganon, so you can face
Calamity Ganon
right away and at a lower health due to the beam attacks from all the Divine Beasts. The
Calamity Ganon
fight is fine, but far from exciting. It uses many of the abilities that the other Blight Ganons use, and it climbs on the walls like a spider. You have to reflect the beams and smack him until he's dead. This brings about Phase 2, which again is another fight that gets clowned on a lot. It's more of a spectacle or a set piece than anything else. You just ride around on your horse, shooting targets on Beast Ganon, while Beast Ganon just stares forward the whole time and shoots a beam straight forward the whole time. Yeah, like I said, it looks cool, but it's hardly a boss. Bosses and enemies get a 2 out of 5. Breath of the Wild has some great and tough standard enemies. They hit hard, and enemies such as Lynels take everything you have to take down. The variety is a little lacking, but it's mostly forgiven. Mini-bosses are also generally a positive, albeit a little too repetitive. Bosses is where things fall apart. The Blight Ganons are all extremely boring in design, and the fight themselves are just not very fun.
Calamity Ganon
It may be the most disappointing final boss in any Zelda game. Side content is a little bit harder to define in Breath of the Wild than other Zelda games. Technically, all the shrines after the first 4 could be seen as side content, or even the Divine Beasts. But for the most part, I'll be looking at things like Korok Seeds, missions that show up in your quest log that are not the main quest, and DLC. Korok Seeds, while pretty necessary for at least the first few upgrades to your item slots, are far and away the hardest thing to complete in the game, since there is a staggering 900 to collect, and most already know what you get for the privilege of completing this. The Korok Seeds were a great way to just sprinkle little mini objectives around Hyrule that don't take too long to collect. After a while, you start to get a sixth sense for when you spot a potential Korok. A rock will look out of place or something else will seem just a little off. I enjoy trying to solve these as I run into them, but I never feel like going out of my way to collect anywhere near close to all of them. The bulk of side quests are quests you pick up from random people in Hyrule, and even if the rewards aren't always the greatest, there are some really great side quests. Terrytown is one of the most involved but most rewarding as you help build and get individuals to move to a brand new town. There's also a number of more simple quests like taking a picture of a fairy fountain. There's a lot to do if you're a completionist. Moving on to the DLC. The first DLC package added a number of things, but most notably Master Mode, which is a more difficult version of the game, and the Trial of the Sword, which is an enemy gauntlet where you start with no items and have to survive through many floors of challenges. Completing each trial will add more base power to the Master Sword. The second DLC package's main content is the Champion's Ballad, a new series of story quests. Champion's Ballad is by far the stronger DLC of the two. The quest starts you back to where it all began at the Shrine of Resurrection, where you receive the one-hit Obliterator. This weapon will kill anything in one hit, but you also die in one hit as well. This completely changes how you strategize and play while trying to get to and complete 4 shrines on the Great Plateau. I thought this particular section was brilliant. After completing this, 4 monuments show up across Hyrule, each with 3 points of interest, which have tasks to unlock 3 shrines for each. This is where things really start to drag. You go to this monument thing, figure out the points of interest, and do each shrine, but it honestly feels not so much like DLC, but just more of the same of what you were doing in the base game. On top of that, once each set of the 3 shrines are complete, you get to fight a boss. What boss, you say? A Blight Ganon.
No, not these guys again!
Yes, you get to redo each Blight Ganon fight, this time with a limited weapon pool, which in fairness does make it harder, but the fact that on paid DLC you're fighting reused Blight Ganons once again is honestly an insult. Mercifully, when this section is complete, things pick back up again. You get to do the best dungeon in the game in the 5th and final Divine Beast. This Divine Beast is based off of the Master Cycle 0, which is your reward for completing this Divine Beast and defeating the final boss. The puzzles are a big step up in difficulty, and it's a lot of fun to complete. There's 4 different tasks in 4 rooms, each feel really unique and nothing like anything in the base game. Finally, after completing the Divine Beast, you face the best boss in the game, Monk Maz Koshia. Maz throws everything at you and then some. It's hard to know what the heck is going on half the time. It took me a couple of tries to defeat this boss because I stupidly didn't bring enough food with me. It was incredibly refreshing to get both a mechanically interesting and challenging boss in this game because we all know this game really needed one. I also quickly want to mention that I appreciated the DLC adding a bunch of non-canon fun gear like Tingle's outfit and Majora's Mask, plus many more. Side content gets a 4 out of 5. Breath of the Wild is not lacking in things to do by any stretch of the imagination. The most disappointing thing about side content is that most of the time, a completed quest will lead to a mediocre reward or just a shrine popping out of the ground. There's hundreds of hours of content available if you want to tackle it, but the best side content is locked behind a paywall. Champion's Ballad is by far the superior DLC to play and is worth your time to complete, even though it really drags during the middle section. Breath of the Wild's music is much more understated than previous games. Since most of your playtime will be set out in the wilderness, the composers of the game chose a less is more approach to make things feel more immersive. While this 100% fits with the game, it does mean we get less of those absolute bangers we come to expect from Zelda games. We still get a few incredible tracks though. The new version of Dragon Roost Island at Rito Village is amazing, Gerudo Town is great, each of the champion themes are great, and many others like Kakariko Village have fantastic themes. Music gets a 3 out of 5. Breath of the Wild soundtrack was fantastically composed, but it just doesn't quite hit the same mark for me that other Zelda games have. I will again say that there is nothing at all wrong with the soundtrack, it's just not one of my top favorites. This category especially comes down to personal preference. This will be the easiest 5 out of 5 ever. Breath of the Wild's pacing is whatever you want it to be. If you want to beat the game right away, you can fight
Calamity Ganon
right after the Great Plateau. You can just do the Divine Beast and then go right to the final boss also if you wanted to. Or you can take your sweet time and do as many shrines and other goals as you want. You can face any Divine Beast at any time in any order. I would be hard-pressed to give this game's pacing any other score given the immense flexibility in how you decide to play the game. It's truly, truly whatever you want it to be. Breath of the Wild is an incredible game that shook up the traditional Zelda formula when it needed a shake-up the most. This game changed video games forever. While my first playthrough of Breath of the Wild was one of my fondest gaming memories, and one of the greatest gaming experiences I've ever had, I have also come to terms with the fact that on each subsequent playthrough, I have found myself having less fun each time, and many of the game's shortcomings become more and more apparent. Even with those apparent flaws, Breath of the Wild is still one of the strongest Zelda titles to date and one of the most important games ever made. So we've gone through every category, and here is a recap of the scores. The scores averaged out to a 3.7 out of 5. We've covered A Link to the Past, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, the original Legend of Zelda, Phantom Hourglass, Oracle of Seasons, and The Wind Waker in previous videos, so here is where we stand with all of the games. As we rate each game, we will continue to populate this list and slowly build the ultimate Zelda series ranking. Make sure to let me know in the comments how you would rank Breath of the Wild. Now, let's take a look at the next Zelda game we will be reviewing. Thank you for watching.